Good afternoon. Welcome back to Passionate World Radio Network. Distinguish yourself from the ordinary. And today we have a gentleman who we interviewed at the Miami International Book Fair, and we're lucky enough to have him back, Brian Stolarz, who wrote a book called Grace and Justice on Death Row. Good afternoon, Brian. How are you doing?
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Well, I think that what you wrote about needs to really get out to everybody who's ever been accused of a crime unjustly and imprisoned.
I agree with that, for sure. I've gotten a lot of letters and correspondence since the book came out, so there's definitely a need. There are more innocent people who are imprisoned and more people who are imprisoned for too long. The clemency grants recently by President Obama were, I think, a great step in erasing some of the history of mandatory minimums and other things. But yes, there is still a very, very large need for this story to be told.
Do you think that justice to imprisoning the wrong person happens more in a certain sector of the country than others?
I would say it happens to a certain demographic. I think folks who don't have access to legal counsel, have to rely on public defenders who are either overstaffed or understaffed or overworked. The poor, the minorities, those types of people, I think, are more likely to be wrongfully imprisoned than someone who has means. The old saying is, the justice system is fair for everyone who can afford a lawyer, I think Mark Twain said, or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, there is a segment of the population that when you're charged, you're in trouble. Dwayne Brown was fortunate because he got not just me, but a team of lawyers willing to spend, hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours, and over $1 million in pro bono fees to help one man. But that's not the norm. I will tell you that is definitely not the norm.
Well, if a person, say, what about a teenager, for example, and they're taken in and they're questioned, what should they be aware of so something like that would not happen to them?
Well, for sure, someone who's under the age of majority, they can request that their parent be there, and they can also request that a lawyer be present. And I recommend almost to anybody who is being investigated or being looked at by the police for certain action is to stand by your rights and ask for a lawyer and keep asking for a lawyer. And even if it's tough, even if you get pressured, like you see on TV all the time when someone invokes and says, I want a lawyer, they say, you don't need a lawyer. But the answer is most times you do. Very few cases I have in which the person's been accused, did he do better just talking without counsel there. But if you're a teenager under the age of majority, you should most certainly say, I need to talk to my mother, to my father, to my legal guardian, and have them show up, and then maybe get that guardian to hire counsel to come talk. Because you say one thing that may or may not be even true. I mean, you've seen people get, coerced into false confessions, and that can potentially ruin, a young person's life.
Absolutely. Now, how dangerous is it to open your mouth up when you are in prison? I know that there are a lot of people in prison who they have snitches who report back to them about conversation or something that maybe a wrongfully imprisoned person would say. Should they be careful on how they conduct themselves once they're in there?
Most times I tell folks to just keep to themselves when when I have a client who's about to be sent off to prison or about to go, for a long period of time. I say, hey, just keep your nose clean. Don't talk to anybody. Just keep your business to yourself and, do the job that you've been appointed to, whether you're working in the kitchen or somewhere else. But yeah, you do see that. There are opportunistic people who want to get a deal, try to squeeze some time off their sentence by, trying to get people to talk. Even in Dwayne Brown's case, there were a few people that allegedly said that he had talked to him about something. We were all able to prove that he hadn't because it just was totally farcical. So yeah, people are always looking to be opportunistic, and you got to be really careful about who you befriend. I used to tell people, don't even say what you're charged with. Don't even say anything. Just keep it away from that.
Just keep quiet. Now, when was Brown in prison, did he help supply you with information about what happened to him? And is there a way that prisoners can compile information to give to their lawyers without somebody grabbing it?
Well, that depends on the facility. Some of them actually have pretty good law libraries, and I will go to see clients in prison, and they will give me copies of cases that they've researched or case sites that they've seen or ideas that they have from looking at law library, but some of them not so much. And death row in particular, Dwayne was allowed some legal papers, but in his particular case, his intellectual disability did not really permit him to be a jailhouse lawyer, as it were. In fact, he did not do any of that. So for his particular case, I did, and my team did, all the legal research, all the legal work. But for some clients I have who are, entrepreneurial and who want to hang out in the law library, and they're allowed to. I mean, when you're not on death row, you have a little more freedom. So some of my clients are able to spend some time in the law library. I'll see them and they'll say, hey, I read this case, and take a look at it. And sometimes it's actually pretty helpful. So it depends on the facility and the level of incarceration.
That's very interesting. Would you encourage people who are outside of the system to look at what kind of rights they have, or to see how best to protect themselves?
Say it again?
Okay. I probably was muddled. Would you suggest to people who want to understand the system, would it be advisable for them to go and take a look at some of these case studies so that they have an idea of what's going on within their own criminal system? Because I don't believe that everybody understands how the criminal system is really handled.
Yeah, that's something that I will tell you has been one of the biggest reactions to my book. Because, I wrote it less for lawyers than I did for regular people, because I wanted regular people to see sort of how the system played out against Dwayne and how it all sort of came against him. And so when people read it and they give me their feedback, they say, well, I can't believe this is how justice is done in this country. So, yeah, we need stories like this to let people know that it's not always fair, the system. I mean, you always hear, oh, it's the best system in the country, the best system in the world, but it's deeply flawed. It is difficult for me to say that it's fair, because it's not for those, as I say, who can't afford counsel. There's a lot now. There's very interesting developments now where public defenders are refusing cases. I was listening to a radio program the other day, I think it was New Orleans, where the head public defender said, I will not take any more cases because my attorneys are too burdened and my investigators are too thinly staffed. And so they're refusing to take cases because they don't want to be they don't want to underperform for their client. And then the practical effect of that becomes where clients languish and they sit in jail for a long time, even pending a trial, even before there's been a guilt or innocence determination. So public defense, which I read in a study was approximately 80% of defendants. So you think of that. Hundreds of thousands of defendants charged every year across this country. And 80% of them rely on a public defender or a lawyer supplied by the court that comes out of taxpayer funds. They are woefully underfunded, and so therefore it creates a real conflict. It creates a real, I think, constitutional violation across the country where people are waiting in jail for months and months and months to even see their lawyer. They're not getting represented well. And so you have this crisis where, well, if you're offered to plead guilty to time served or to a smaller amount, or just plead guilty so you know what your sentence is going to be, you'll take it. And some people, I'm sure, have pled guilty even though they're not really guilty. They just want to get the hell out of prison. And so, as I say, the system for those who can't afford counsel is broken. I don't think, though, in anticipating where you might be asking me, I don't think this next administration is going to give any weight or any credence to that and will not fund indigent defendants. I don't see a big push to fund, federal or state public defenders.
Either do I.
And that's a shame.
Is it possible that some of the people who are languishing in jail have the same problems or similar problems and could be handled by one or two people as a group?
Well, that also goes into so a constitutional question is whether there's a conflict of interest, and usually there is. So if you have a case, for example, just to give a hypothetical, if there's a drug conspiracy in which there's a wholesaler who gets the drugs and a street level dealer who sells those drugs, the same lawyer could not represent both those people. It would have to be two different lawyers, and that's why in a big case you'd have. I'm in one now with, I want to say 80 lawyers or 80 clients. and there's 80 different lawyers because unless the interests are 100% aligned, or there's a waiver in which both clients agree, but that's also very rare and not something that's advisable, every person's going to have their own lawyer. Now, in pre-investigations, I've represented, for example, companies in which the company and some of their senior leaders are aligned, and I can represent both. But then if there begins to be a division among that or a separation, then we have to get a separate lawyer for that individual. So there is no panacea as to, well, then this one guy takes all 10 of these guys. A lawyer can take 10 different clients and 10 different cases, but then that also comes to the burdening, which is, I had, for example, when I was a public defender in Brooklyn, New York, I had about, on average, 70 to 100 cases, which sounds like a lot, but it's not really. That was manageable. When it got over 100, it became a little difficult to manage. But I wrote in the book, and there's plenty of states who have lawyers with 400 to 500 cases. And think about that.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, and 500 individual stories, individual witnesses to go find, individual documents to research, individual people to fight for, and it's impossible. There's no way to put it. I mean, and you're paying a public defender $40 or $50 grand coming out of law school for working for a state public defenders. Federal makes more, but federal is not as burdened with cases because there's not as many federal crimes as there are state crimes. And so you have these overburdened state public defenders. If you're a student coming out of law school, you're going to get burnt out right quick because you're like, no way am I doing 500 cases. And then so you get this really unfair system. I think this point in the book where in the federal system there was the sequestration where there was drastic budget cuts. And the federal public defenders, were obligated to take furlough Fridays, where they weren't getting paid for Fridays. At the same time, they were hiring new prosecutors, the Department of Justice was. So think about just that optics right there. You're cutting salaries and making public defenders take a day off, although my friends who worked there said they still went in anyway because their clients still needed them. They just weren't getting paid. But yet they were hiring new prosecutors. It's never politically popular to pay for indigent defense, and it's always politically popular to pay for prosecutors and to pay for stuff on crime. I do hope, though, and the current administration coming in aside, I do hope that there is a push for more equality in that, because I do think people are kind of sick of how tilted the system is. And, the movements, from the left, and frankly from the libertarian wing. You got guys like Rand Paul, who are way out there on criminal justice reform in a really good way, talking about, how minorities are, overpopulating the jails, how they are, the ones who are targeted by law enforcement, and how, mandatory minimums need to go away. So there's actually a right and a left consensus on criminal justice reform.
I hope they do it because it is a kangaroo court. There's no doubt about that. In fact, if you watch some of the court cases that they have on the public channels, you can see that it's the common people, the poor, single women, divorce, whatever, they are not represented as well as they should. And it kind of makes you wonder, because there is a piece of paper stating that they should get equal justice from whatever happens to them in court. They do not get it at all. How did we manage to veer so much off the track of not really defending the people who more or less run this country for the wealthy?
Yeah, you've identified the issue here, which is, I do a lot of private work for people, obviously. I mean, Dwayne was a pro bono case, and we didn't charge him fees, and, I have some court-appointed cases that I handle, but for the most part, my work is privately, and so people pay me to represent them, and it all comes down, frankly, to money, and to the lack of such for the poor, and thus the poor get what they get, and that's not always sufficient. In fact, it's dangerous. way dangerous. For example, in Dwayne's case, got a court-appointed lawyer who did not do the greatest of jobs. I think could have done better on a number of subjects, including, the subject phone record that ultimately set Dwayne free was more than likely subject to a subpoena that could have been filed back at the trial. But she had a lot of active cases herself, and she probably, in her mind, did the best she could. But an innocent man got sentenced to death. That's a dramatic and obviously very serious example, but every day in courts across this country, literally every day, injustice is occurring. People are getting, improperly or inadequately counseled. They're getting more time than they should. They're not getting people to go take a look at their witnesses, at their defense, and they're just another cog in the wheel. And that's unjust.
I don't see how they can go home at night.
Well, it's the system.
I know it's the system, but I feel that lawyers are like doctors, and you make a prognosis, and then you try to heal the prognosis or offer something that will help heal the prognosis. So I can't see even a public defender just throw away anybody because they have other cases. I mean, that's the nature of the beast. They know that before they go in to get their degree, don't they?
Yeah, I'd say yes and no to that. I don't think any public defender I've ever worked with or know intentionally violates anybody's rights. I think it just becomes a victim of circumstance in some ways. That if there's a plea deal offered that's reasonable enough, the client takes it because they know that if they go to trial and lose, that they'll get, double the time, which is the other hammer.
Or worse,
yes. The prosecutor has. So there's that. And then there's also the defendant probably says, well, I haven't seen my lawyer in 3 months, and he comes in to give me a deal, and now I'm not going to see him again for another 3 months, so I'll just take the deal so I can go home to my family. No public defender I know was actively trying to do this, but if you have 500 cases, what else can you do? There's only so many hours in a day. There's only, triage happens naturally. If I had 100 cases and 25 were serious felonies, I'd spend more time on the felonies because
you would have to prioritize. I understand.
You have to, but I still also cared very deeply for all my clients and still do now. Like if I have court-appointed cases now, I treat them exactly the same as the ones who are paying me many multiples of what the court pays me.
So what should a student who is going for law or has just graduated with a law degree, what are some of the things that you feel they should be aware of in a system that doesn't work correctly?
Wow. Well, that's
all right. You want me to water that down a little bit?
No. It's fine. I always like your manner of questions. I like how you take on the big topics, Lillian. So I'm happy to answer.
Okay.
As someone who's coming out of law school and wants to be a public defender, I would say do it. Do it with your eyes open, but also do it fearlessly and take on the system. And there are several public defender groups that are suing the state for lack of funding and lack of access to justice. So become part of that movement. There's a movement now where public defenders are saying enough, no more. And so become part of that movement. And then if you bridge that with policy and with, outreach on, getting these folks better funded, then you can become part of the, hopefully, next generation of advocates who are well-funded and can adequately represent your clients. If you're going to be a prosecutor, you're never going to have that problem. You're going to get your paycheck every 2 weeks, and you're going to be on the side of, quote-unquote justice. But I would advise you and beg you to be fair, to look at people as humans and individuals, to never, ever shelve exculpatory evidence or even stuff that appears exculpatory. If it feels in your gut like it's exculpatory, turn it over. And, hopefully that will create sort of balance on both sides. I gave a speech at a law school a few months ago, and a woman came up to me and said, I'm going to be a prosecutor. I said, great. She said, but I promise I will never, ever hide exculpatory evidence. And I laughed.
What you should tell her is, if you really want to be a good prosecutor, become a public defender first.
Well, that's probably true, too.
And then go on, because I really feel that the way you're describing a public defender, that's the internship that all lawyers should take first before they do anything else, because it will open their eyes. And I think a lot of these kids need their eyes opened.
And some of them, though, I tell you, don't have the stomach for it. Let's just be sort of fair about it. Some people go to law school for the express purpose of going on to a major law firm, making, $180,000 a year, which is what they pay now, coming out.
Wow. I'm in the wrong
bonuses.
business.
Yeah, well.
You too. Okay.
Even though I'm a lawyer, I am too. Now, I mean, I'm in a private firm now, but not a big major law firm that pays that kind of money. But, yeah, I mean, most people, I'd say a good percentage of people go to law school for that reason, to go make money. And that's fine. If that's your goal, that's totally fine. But I also think those people owe a duty when they get into the big firms to do pro bono work.
I think so, too. And if nothing else, I would think that those kind of firms ought to set up independent programs where people can go and try themselves and see how good a lawyer they are by working with the underdog. Because when you're working with somebody who is not privileged, you are basically reinventing the wheel. You're doing everything from scratch all over again. You're not going to be handed the information. You have to go and dig it out.
You're right. No, you're right. And that's why there are some big law firms that actually have a secondment program with, state agencies, and they are the ones that are doing it the right way. I was interviewed by Bloomberg Law, who did a piece on sort of the big firm's role in pro bono, and I think, from my religious upbringing growing up, but also just from just doing the right thing, period, regardless of religion, you owe it, if you are blessed to be a lawyer, to give back. And so if you're at a big firm, go do some pro bono cases. If you're at a big firm and don't want to do pro bono, but for whatever reason, donate some money to a legal services organization. Like, make this equal. But for those of you who are, inspired to be public defenders, go do it. It remains probably aside from Dwayne's case, which is the case of my life and career, and frankly, I could retire. Being a public defender was a true highlight of my career because the only reason why you're there is the Constitution. There's no money involved. They can't pay you. I mean, guys would say, "Hey, what do I owe you?" And I'd say nothing. And I would buy them lunch and take them out. Money was never part of it. It's beautiful. You get to be their advocate because the Constitution says so, and you get to fight the government and fight the power every single day. It's exhausting, but it's beautiful work.
Well, the next time you make a speech at a school, I thought you should talk to the people over there who put in courses, or I know that every school sends out kids to do internship programs. I did one at the University of New Hampshire for speech and pathology, and I went to the hospital, and I went to private clinics, and I had to work with people and stuff and with kids. And I really have to tell you, if you don't know what you're doing, that's the best time to find out before you really hit the road running. And I could see something like this being attached to a school for credit where the kids have to do an internship as a public defender.
I agree. I think that would be great. And I was one when I did an internship when I was a first year summer, because after your first year law school, your summer, people do sometimes public interest, because large law firms usually only hire second year summers. And so my first year summer, I was a public defender, intern, and I loved it. And that's how I kind of caught the bug. And my school paid me a very small stipend so I could eat and sleep in a place. But yeah, everyone should do it first because it is an eye-opening experience, and it is not for everybody. That's why I don't begrudge people when they say, "I can't do that. I can't go to court. I'm an M&A lawyer, or I'm a corporate lawyer, or I'm a environmental lawyer, or an IP lawyer." Like, there's so many different kinds of lawyers. Everyone thinks of lawyers as me, the guy who defends somebody.
Yes, and I don't think they realize that the profession itself has bled out, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, there's way more lawyers than you think, and there's way more kinds of lawyers than you think. Just in my own firm, there's 300 and something, and there's 300 and something different people with various different kinds of experiences. So, most people aren't criminal defense lawyers. It's just the ones that are, they end up having TV shows and, law and order.
I'm working on that. I'm creating a TV channel. Keep your fingers crossed. I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned the Constitution. And the Constitution, how does that lend itself to what you did with Brown? And in general, when you go out to help people like him to get them out?
Well, during my public defender days, I would, be waking up every day saying it was my job today to defend the Constitution. I felt that as a huge burden. and honor. With Dwayne, it almost transcended the Constitution. He was entitled to a fair trial. He didn't get it. He was entitled to effective counsel. He didn't get it. He was entitled to due process. He didn't get it. He was entitled to be punished in a way that was not cruel and unusual, which, thank God, he never got punished ultimately. But that, if he had gotten that ultimate punishment, that would have been unconstitutional. There were so many different angles to this. And at the end of the day, the constitutional right that was violated was the government withheld exculpatory evidence, meaning he did not receive a fair constitutional trial. And we got a new trial, but the government did not seek a new trial, did not proceed with a new trial because they knew the case was, there was no evidence left, and they dismissed it. So, yeah, I mean...
And they dismissed it because it was poor.
No, they dismissed the case because there was nothing left.
There was nothing left.
Yeah.
And so they just threw up their hands, which also makes you wonder. So if a person is caught in a similar situation like Brown, then they should make sure they have a copy of the Constitution and go down the rights that they're entitled to by that piece of paper and demand from whoever is representing them.
Yeah, I mean, I highly doubt indigent folks are going to be carrying around a little pocket Constitution. I do, because I love it, and it's what, my job is based on, so I have one that a dear client gave to me once, so I always carry it around. But yeah, they are entitled to more than they think. It probably comes in more handy when they're about to be interrogated, because they could say, I'm not talking to you, and so I have a lawyer, and they could keep saying that over and over and over and over again until a lawyer is provided.
Well, I think we've covered pretty much of all of it, except, Brian, please tell everybody where they can find you on the web, where they can find your book on the web, and anything else you believe they need to know.
Well, thank you. It really was an honor to talk to you. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I'd love to talk to you again. So the name of the book is Grace and Justice on Death Row, and it's on Amazon, obviously. I love it when people buy it at smaller independent bookstores, because those are my favorite kinds of places, but it's also at places like Barnes & Noble. I'm on Twitter at Brian Stolarz, BrianStolarz, and I'm at the law firm of LeClaire Ryan in Alexandria, Virginia.
Terrific. I enjoy talking to you. You keep my little gray cells working.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen and children of all ages, you can hear this stream all over again at Passionate World Radio Network, twitter.com/@Caldwell, CAULDWELL, facebook.com/PWR Network, and googleplus.com/PWR Network. Before we go away, this is what Pluto has to say. The direction in which education starts a man will determine his future life. Thank you all very much for listening, and remember, Happy New Year.